The entire school knew the boy was different, but nobody knew the secret behind him. Every morning, a young Korean boy with Down syndrome walked into Amanda's classroom alone. No mother, no father, no one waiting for him after school. Until one rainy evening, Amanda followed him outside and saw the man who came to pick him up. A tall Korean man wearing dark glasses, holding a white cane, surrounded by armed bodyguards. He was completely blind. But the moment Amanda looked at him, something felt wrong. This wasn't an ordinary father, and she was right, because the blind man standing in front of her was actually one of South Korea's richest billionaires and one of its most feared mafia bosses. His wife had died years earlier. His eyesight had disappeared. His son had been left emotionally broken. And despite having billions of dollars, nobody wanted to stay in their home, until Amanda did something nobody else had dared to do. She looked into the blind man's medical records and discovered something that could change his entire life. He might be able to see again, but Amanda had no idea that helping this man regain his eyesight would eventually make him fall deeply in love with her and uncover a secret about his dead wife that someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. And that was only the beginning. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because I want to know how many countries are following Amanda's story. Now, let's go back to the day Amanda first met the boy who would change her life forever. Amanda had built her whole career on patience. She was a Nigerian teacher living in Seoul, known in the staff room for reaching the students that everyone else had quietly given up on. But even she found herself puzzled by the boy in her afternoon class. Minjun rarely spoke about his family. He arrived each morning in clothes that cost more than most teachers earn it in a month, yet his shoes were sometimes dirty, his lunch untouched, his eyes anxious the moment anyone mentioned his father. Amanda assumed at first that he came from a broken home. She could not have been more wrong. One afternoon, long after the other students had gone home, Amanda found Minjun still sitting at his desk, staring down at something cupped protectively in his hands. She approached it slowly, the way she approached every frightened child, without pressure, without questions. When he finally let her see, it was a small photograph, soft at the corners from being touched. Too many times, a woman with a gentle smile looked back at the camera. His mother, head-mitted quietly, was gone. He looked at her picture every afternoon because it was the only way he still remembered her voice. Amanda felt something crack open in her chest. Nobody at school understood the weight this child was carrying alone. Nothing prepared her for what came the next morning, when Min Jun arrived with a bruise blooming along his arm. He had been pushed during recess by older boys who mocked the way he spoke and moved. Amanda reported it immediately, but what troubled her most was Min Jun's refusal to name the children responsible. He was not protecting them. He was terrified of what would happen if his father ever found out. From that day forward, Amanda began watching him more closely. She noticed that the moment the final bell rang, something in him tightened. He would linger by the gate long after the other children had been collected by parents and drivers, eyes fixed on the road, waiting for Somyeon, who never seemed to come. Then, one rainy afternoon, someone finally did. The black car arrived exactly as the sky opened up. Amanda watched from beneath the school awning as a driver rushed to open the rear door, and a tall man stepped out with unnatural precision, one hand resting lightly on the driver's arm, the other gripping a white cane. Dark glasses. A face carved from stone, the kind of stillness that made grown security guard straight in their spines. Amanda realized with a slow chill that this had to be Min Jun's father, but something about the way the world reacted to him did not make sense for an ordinary parent. Teachers who had been laughing moments earlier suddenly found reasons to look away. Even the principal, a man who never bowed to anyone, greeted him with his head slightly lowered. Amanda noticed the scars along the backs of his hands. The impossibly expensive suit. The way 3 separate men positioned themselves without being told, forming an invisible wall around him. She had no idea who he was. She only saw what mattered most in that moment. A blind father struggling to find his son in a crowd he could not see, and a son who was too afraid to simply call out to him. Then she noticed something that broke her heart completely. The father had no idea that his son's arm was still bruised from the day before. He could not see Thangery on his own child, and no one around him had bothered to tell him. In the weeks that followed, Amanda grew steadily more concerned. Minjun often arrived actual with homework unfinished, not from laziness, but because his nights were spent quietly caring for a father who refused outside help. A child should never be the one holding a household together. Amanda began learning, piece by piece, that Kang Taehyun had withdrawn from the world almost entirely since his wife's death, and that his failing eyesight had worsened alongside his grief until he stopped trusting doctors altogether. Using extra tutoring as her excuse, Amanda began visiting their home. The mansion was staggering, room after room of imported art and quiet luxury, yet it felt hollow in a way no amount of money could disguise. Minjun's bedroom was filled with toys still in their boxes. Down the hall, his mother's belongings remained exactly where she had left them, untouched, as though moving a single object might erase her completely. Amanda discovered that the boy still slept every night with one of his mother's old scarves pressed against his cheek. He was not spoiled. He was simply lonely in a house built for 100 people and lived in by 2. When Amanda finally met Taehyun properly, he was colder than she expected, guarded in the particular way of a man who had learned that everyone who approached him wanted something. Amanda made it clear, without needing to explain herself, that she wanted nothing from him at all. She was there for his son. That single fact confused him more than anything else had in years. Slowly, carefully, she became part of their daily rhythm. She helped Minjun with his lessons. She taught him small routines that gave him confidence, ways to organize his morning, ways to speak up for himself. For the first time in longer than either of them could remember, Thebwe began smiling without being asked to. Taehyun noticed. He began listening for the sound off Amanda's arrival each week, not because she treated him like a billionaire to be managed, but because, for the first time since his wife had died, someone in his home treated him like Ammon instead of a burden. What Amanda did not yet know was that hidden inside a locked drawer in Taehyun's private custody sat a medical file he had buried years earlier, a file that suggested his blindness might never have needed to be permanent at all. And she had no way of knowing that the quiet, careful world she was building for this father and son was about to be shattered by 2 discoveries, one that would give Taehyun back his sight, and another that would reveal exactly who he really was. Amanda found the file by accident, tucked beneath a stack of old contracts she had offered to help organize. What she read stopped her cold. Taehyun's blindness was not what everyone assumed. Years earlier, doctors had diagnosed him with a serious but treatable condition, damage compounded by years of neglect, stress, and a body that had simply stopped fighting for itself after his wife died. There was still a chance, one doctor had written, that surgery could restore part of his vision. Amanda sat with that single sentence for a long time before she found the courage to bring it to him. Taehyun's reaction was not gratitude. It was anger, quiet and controlled, the kind that comes from a man who has already been disappointed too many times to trust hope again. He told her, in as few words as possible, that he had tried treatments before. All of them had failed. He had stopped wanting to hope, because hope was the thing that hurt the most when it collapsed. Amanda did not argue with him that night. She simply refused to let the file disappear back into a drawer. Over the following days, she quietly reached out to specialists across the city, describing his case without using his name, protecting the privacy he guarded so fiercely. Eventually, one name kept surfacing, a renowned ophthalmologist known for taking cases other doctors had abandoned. When Amanda finally convinced this specialist to review Taehyun's file, things came back different this time. There was a real possibility of partial vision returning. Not guaranteed. Not without risk. But real. If you are enjoying this story so far, this is the perfect moment to hit subscribe, because the next few minutes are about to change everything you think you understand about Taehyun. Make sure notifications are on, because stories like this one continue every week, and you will not want to miss what happens after Amanda knocks on his study door with the specialist's answer in her hand. What Amanda did not expect, on the evening she finally convinced Taehyun to at least meet the specialist, was to walk into a room she was never supposed to see. She had come to drop off paperwork, assuming the house was quiet. Instead, she found Taehyun standing at the center of his study, speaking in a voice she had never heard from him before, low, precise, absolute. Around him stood men who did not behave like employees. They behaved like soldiers awaiting orders from a general. The warmth Amanda had slowly built with this man vanished in an instant, replaced by something that made the air in the room feel dangerous to breathe. She backed out before anyone noticed her, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just witnessed. Later, through careful, quiet questions to people who trusted her, the truth arrived in pieces too large to deny. Kang Tae-hyun was not simply a wealthy businessman. Behind the closed doors of his empire, he commanded one of the most feared criminal networks in the country. The gentle, grieving father Amanda had come to care for, and the man an entire city moved out of the way for were somehow the same person. For a long moment, Amanda considered walking away entirely. Fear told her that was the only reasonable choice. But then she thought of Min-jun, waiting by the school gate for a father who could not see him coming, sleeping every night with his mother's scarf pressed against his cheek, because no one else had ever taught him how to be less alone. She thought of the man who had let his guard down enough to listen for her footsteps each week. She did not excuse Yuhat she had learned, but she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that his frightening reputation had been built, at least in part, as a wall to protect the only family he had left. She stayed. And she pushed forward with the surgery, refusing to let fear of what he was erase what she had already seen him become. Looking back, she realized there had been signs all along, small details she had quietly explained away, because the man in front of her never once made her feel unsafe. The way certain visitors were never announced by name. The way his phone calls always ended the moment she entered a room. The way his household staff flinched at sounds that meant nothing to her. She had noticed all of it and chosen, each time, to trust the version of him that sat patiently through Min-jun's reading lessons instead of the whispers that followed his name through the city. Now she understood why both versions existed. She simply had to decide whether she could still stand beside both of them. The night before the operation, Min-jun could not sleep. He kept asking, in his own quiet way, whether his father might not wake up at all. Amanda sat beside his bed until dawn, promising him she would not leave, promising him that whatever happened, he would not face it alone. It was a promise that, in that house, no one had made to him in years. The surgery took most of the day. Amanda waited outside with Min-jun pressed against her side, watching the clock, watching the door, watching every doctor who passed for some signal what was happening behind it. When the surgeon finally emerged, his expression gavinothing away until the words left his mouth. The procedure had succeeded. No one could promise how much vision would return, or how quickly, but the surgery itself had gone exactly as hoped. When Tae-hyun opened his eyes for the first time beneath the soft hospital lighting, the world arrived to him in pieces. Blurred light first. Then vague shapes drifting slowly into focus. Then, unmistakably, the small outline of a boy standing frozen at the foot of his bed, afraid to move in case the moment was not real. Min-jun ran to him before anyone could stop him, and for the first time in years, Tae-hyun saw his son's face clearly, saw the small nose that matched his own, the eyes that had once belonged to his late wife. The sight of his own child undid him completely, a man who had built an empire out of fear reduced to silent tears in a hospital bed. Then, from the doorway, he saw her. Amanda, standing quietly, giving father and son their moment before stepping forward. Tae-hyun looked at her, the way a man looks at someone he has only ever known through voice and instinct, finally matching a face to the person who had refused, again and again, to give up on his family. In that instant, something in him shifted permanently. The weeks that followed felt, to Min-jun, like watching his father meet the world for the very first time. Tae-hyun's vision returned slowly and imperfectly, colors before details, face before names, but every small improvement felt like a miracle inside that enormous, echoing house. He stood for a long time in front of the portrait of his late wife that had hung untouched for years, finally able to see her face again instead of only remembering it. He walked through Hai's son's bedroom, and for the first time truly saw the toys still sealed in their boxes, Thune-touched school certificates pinned to the wall, evidence of a childhood he had been present for but never fully witnessed. It humbled a man who was feared by nearly everyone who knew Hai's name. He also, for the first time in years, truly saw Amanda. Not the outline of a voice that arrived every week with patience he did not think he deserved, but the woman herself, steady and unimpressed by his wealth, entirely unafraid of the parts of him that terrified everyone else. Hed did not yet know how deeply she was about to change the rest of his life, or how the very thing that had brought them together, this small act of stubborn kindness, was about to place her directly in the path of a danger that had been waiting, patiently, for years, hidden far closer to home than either of them could have imagined. In the months that followed, something the mansion had not held in years slowly returned to it. Laughter. Min-jun no longer waited anxiously by the school gate, because his father now came to collect him himself, standing tall and unmistakable at the front of the crowd. Amanda continued teaching every day, refusing every offer Tae-hyun made to ease her life with his fortune. She did not want a driver. She did not want a new apartment. She wanted her classroom, her students, and her evenings with a boy who had once been invisible and a man who had once been unreachable. That refusal was exactly what made Tae-hyun fall in love with her. He had spent years surrounded by people who feared him, flattered him, or quietly calculated what they could take from him. Amanda was the first person in longer than he could remember who simply saw him, not the businessman, not the boss, not the blind man everyone had given up on, but a father, a widower, a man capable of loving again if someone were patient enough to wait for him to remember how. The danger arrived exactly when the family had finally allowed itself to feel safe. Word reached Tae-hyun's rivals that the feared boss who had rebuilt his sight and his heart had one clear weakness: a Nigerian schoolteacher who visited his home every week without protection. Amanda was taken outside her apartment on an ordinary Tuesday evening, bundled into a car before she had time to call for help. Tae-hyun's entire organization mobilized within the hour. Every contact, every favor, every resource turned toward finding her. It was Min-jun, small and often underestimated, who noticed what the grown men around him had missed. He remembered a symbol stitched into the clothing of a man he had seen near his mother shortly before she died, a detail no one had ever thought to ask a child about. When photographs of the men suspected in Amanda's kidnapping came back to the house, Min-jun pointed at the same symbol without hesitation. Tae-hyun went still. The possibility settled over the room like ice. Amanda's kidnapping might not be a random act of revenge. It might be connected to the death he had spent years believing was an accident. Amanda survived the ordeal through sheer will, working loose a set of restraints during a moment when her captors grew careless, and slipping out through a service door before anyone realized she was gone. But she did not leave empty-handed. Tucked inside a folder she grabbed in her way out was an old photograph, half hidden among documents she was never meant to see. It showed Tae-hyun's late wife standing beside a man Amanda recognized immediately, someone who sat inside Tae-hyun's inner circle to this day, someone he trusted completely. She expected relief when she finally returned home. Instead, she found Tae-hyun standing motionless in his study, staring at the photograph she had brought back with her, his newly restored eyes catching a detail Amanda had missed entirely. The man in the picture had a scar along his jaw, faint, but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. A scar that belonged to Ammon Tae-hyun had personally watched be buried years earlier. Someone inside his own house had been lying to him for a very long time. The investigation that followed was quiet, careful, and terrifying in its implications, but it would have to wait. Because somewhere in the middle of the fear and the unanswered questions, Tae-hyun made a decision he had been circling for weeks. He tried, at first, to push Amanda away, convinced that loving him only made her a target for the dangers that follow at his name. Amanda refused to be pushed. She had already survived the worst his enemies could throw at her, and she was not about to abandon the family she had helped rebuild out of fear off what might come next. So instead of walking away, Tae-hyun knelt in front of her in the quiet of his study and asked her to become his wife, not because he needed someone to manage his home or raise his son, but because for the first time since his wife's death, he wanted someone to share the rest of his life with, danger and all. Amanda said yes with tears she did not bother hiding. Min-jun was the first person they told, and his reaction was the one both of them had secretly hoped for more than anyone else's approval. He threw his arms around them both at once, refusing to let go for a long time, as though he needed to feel with his own hands that this was real and not something that would disappear the way so many good things in his life once had. That night, for the first time since his mother died, he fell asleep without reaching for her old scarf. The wedding was small, warm, and unlike anything the Kang family had hosted in years. Min-jun stood proudly beside his father, finally wearing the family he had quietly wished for every night he slept clutching his mother's old scarf. Tae-hyun watched Amanda walk toward him with eyes that could now see every detail of her smile, and for the first time since he had buried his wife, he felt something inside him that resembled the beginning of a new life rather than the ashes of an old one. For a while, it seemed as though the story might simply end there, happily, quietly, the way every viewer watching had hoped it would. Min-jun thrived at school, no longer the boy nobody noticed, but the boy whose father waited for him every single day at the gate. Tae-hyun's sight continued to strengthen. Amanda kept her classroom, her students, and evenings with the family she had chosen. Amanda allowed herself, for the first time in a long while, to stop watching every shadow and simply live inside the life she had built. She still taught her class every morning. She still walked home some evenings just to feel the ordinary rhythm of the city around her, the one thing that had never changed, no matter how much her own life had transformed. It was that same sense of quiet normalcy that made what happened next feel so impossible to accept. Then, on an ordinary morning 3 months after the wedding, an envelope arrived at the house with no sender listed anywhere on it. Amanda opened it out of simple curiosity while waiting for her coffee to cool. Inside was an old hospital document, the kind of paperwork that should have meant nothing to anyone outside a filing cabinet. But as she read it, her hands began to shake. The document suggested that the accident everyone believed had taken Tae-hyun's wife's life may not have happened the way the official records claimed. Dates did not align. Signatures looked altered. Someone, at some point, had gone to enormous trouble to rewrite a dead woman's final days. Before Amanda could process what she was holding, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she did not recognize. Attached was a single photograph. It showed a woman who looked unmistakably like Tae-hyun's late wife, alive, walking through what appeared to be a quiet foreign street, the timestamp embedded in the image dated months after the date carved into her gravestone. Amanda stared at it until the coffee in her hand went cold. A second message arrived moments later, containing no explanation, no demand, only a single sentence that made her blood run cold. The person responsible for what really happened to Tae-hyun's wife was still living inside his own family. Amanda looked up from her phone toward the mansion behind her, toward the windows of the study where Tae-hyun was working, toward the room upstairs where Min-jun was still getting ready for school. A family she had fought to build now standing, without knowing it, inside. Secret that had never actually been buried. Somewhere close enough to trust, someone was watching, and Amanda had no idea yet how close to home the truth was about to arrive. To be continued in part 2.